Hey folks, Steve here with another Prussia's Glory video. In this video, we're going to be looking at the Battle of Leuthen. At least I believe that's the right way to pronounce that. I may have that wrong. I've only read it in books and have seen it pronounced in a couple of places. But if I got that wrong, somebody please let me know. But Leuthen is the battle that is probably one of the more famous ones for Frederick the Great, wherein he executed yet another oblique maneuver that really put the Austrians in really bad shape. So this map is more vertically oriented. Um, so while the hex numbers read as if you were sitting over here, the map is really set up easier to set up and look at like this. If you're playing solitaire at least, so you can see I've got all the second counters for all the units oriented up there that I can grab as needed. Um, and because this is the battle scenario, we start halfway through the overall turns that are available for the scenario. So we start with turn 7, which is the 1300 hour turn, and then we could play up through 1700 hours. In the actual position, you can see that the Austrian forces are arrayed in what was to be their sort of main battle line, while the Prussians have swung down and around like this. So the historical situation that brought this on was that one in the early morning of the day of battle, there was significant fog, and then there's the terrain over here was such that basically Frederick maneuvered his forces south, leaving a couple of you could almost think of them as like distraction units, trying to trick the Austrians and like, hey, we're still over here. We're going to approach from, I guess this might, yeah, approach from the west. And so this left the Austrians kind of maintaining their same battle line, right? They're arrayed to go this way, to head west. They're not marching south right now, right? They were headed west. So Frederick took his forces, he swung them around like this, and then he came at them here, which meant that really the Prussians could focus their effort and firepower on one end of the Austrian line and chew them up. And despite the fact that these guys were would start to come down, and there'd be some fighting over here, that was kind of significant. I think I might be off by a couple hexes, but they had brought forces down here. There was kind of a standoff, various cavalry charges that resolved, and really it ended up being the Austrians, routing off the field. So again, when we're playing this game, and if you're playing this as just the battle, right, the significant things that determined the real execution of victory have already occurred. Frederick has maneuvered into a position that gives him a lot more firepower against a smaller frontage of Austrian forces with weaker morale, which should mean that a lot of the this gray formation, this red formation, green, will get chewed up by the time the light blue and darker blue manage to get down here, and that should be already hopefully achieving something close to the Prussian victory at that point. So this one will be maybe not quite as one-sided as the Rossbach battle, but this should be um, pretty much in the Prussians' favor, I'd say, very generally speaking. Now, if we were playing the main scenario, and I may still do that when I'm done with the battle, the Prussians would enter over here, and then they've got, again, some opportunities to do this maneuver while the Austrian player is spending morale to try to activate. And I guess if they did activate, what we would maybe see happen is a pivoting of the Austrian line, and maybe a swing around would be good there. But here, again, just to try out the battle, we're gonna play the battle. Now, if this were maybe a more zoomed in kind of tactical game, maybe you would have just like what's on camera here, and then zoomed in, and then you'd have a stream of Austrian reinforcements coming from off map. But here, you get the much wider perspective of just how deft the maneuvering was to put the Austrians in this position. There's a couple of special rules with this one where, generally speaking, the Austrians will need to retreat towards Leuthen, the hex itself right here, before heading eastward. to retreat. So there's a little bit, I'm not sure what that'll really do other than to make it so that as we are swung over here and forces are pushed back, they are going to have to go back north rather than just simply retreat east, where they're going to run into each other and cause a bunch of problems. That's sort of a, again, a slight little special rule that's going to dictate things. Again, I think for the Prussians, what we want is chew up the Austrian forces, cause them to retreat, run into the guys that are behind them, and just create a lot of chaos and disorder in the Austrian lines. They try to swing around, and some of these guys may be coming west and then south to try to avoid the traffic jam, and where they'll probably be met by Prussian cavalry, which I think is what historically largely happened. So it's one of those things. It's like, hey, this was historically an excellent, great victory for Frederick. We're going to play that out and kind of see that happen. I think obviously the main scenario gives you a lot more possibilities of how this battle could have gone, and it's probably more of a game here where, yeah, boy, I mean, if you just had zoomed in to a more tactical game, I have to feel like, you're just going to have the Prussians beating up on the Austrians pretty badly. So I don't know. But okay, we'll get started. It's going to be the Prussians' first turn. They start with 18 morale, which is robust. The Austrians actually start with 21 morale, but again, I think they're in a much greater disadvantage. And you can just kind of tell by looking at the second step units that there are a lot more Austrians on the board, generally speaking, than the Prussians. So it's all about concentration of force. The Prussians do enjoy pretty high morale on their units, like 5s, 6s, and 7s, pretty standard across the board. And you can even see for the Austrians, there's a couple of 6 morale units, but there's also a lot of 3s, 4s, and you can imagine a lot of those, even the good units, like there are some 7s, they will get attrited down and have lower morale over the length of the battle. So yeah, so we're going to get started with the Prussians, and I'll kind of show things as the battle develops. Okay, here we are at the beginning of what will be the second turn of the scenario, so the 1400-hour turn, and here's what we got. There was an initial clashing of arms that I would say the Prussians managed to get away with a pretty good set of rolls. Basically, there was one Austrian counterattack that looked like it was probably going to push this poor unit out of its hex, but they rolled very poorly, and that has caused some grief. So they had a unit that was routed that managed to get to a disordered state. This guy recently routed. There's still some disrupted units. So the Prussians are feeling okay, but the Austrians are now moving. Some formations are moving in column, specifically these guys, to try to get down onto a flank, while these guys are more slowly kind of coming across this way. I think the key thing that we need to try to do is to open up the lane so that as the gray formation gets pushed back, that we're not getting into a cascade of routing units. So we're spreading out a little bit, but I think that's the best thing to do here as the Austrians. Spread out a little bit, maybe not too much, but we want to plug off these opportunities for the Prussians to kind of come around. So you can see they're kind of spreading out. This wing's trying to come in here to reinforce, and then we're trying to get set up into a solid position. I think this is a bit ahistorical because I think the Austrians brought down some of their cavalry down this way, while instead I'm bringing them down to the left. So that's maybe a little bit of ahistorical action on my part as the Austrians, but I don't want to do just what they did. Because what I think I want to do is, we've got some decent morale units. I want to try to hold something of some line, and then I can swing them back around either way with their high movement points as cavalry. So we'll see. The main thing is I wanted to make sure these guys could move in column and be screened, so they can quickly get to wherever they need to go in the moment, and see how things develop. But it's really hard to figure out where can the Austrians legitimately go on offense anywhere. So I think I'm still looking to maybe turn a flank somewhere. And if we can get some of these infantry into the hills or the towns, that will give them some defense against the left flank of the Prussians, their cavalry, because there are a number of penalties when it comes to to towns. And just to show that on the terrain chart, you can see town for cavalry is a -4 in many cases. So that's sort of a key thing to try to get into a better position against the Prussian assault. So if we're going to go back to the Prussians for their half of the second turn, they've certainly got into a position where a lot of their artillery is going to be capable of firing. So we may not even move. We may try to, he's engaged, so he's stuck, maybe a sacrificial lamb, but we may be able to um, take some shots at some of these units over here. We're going to have to check some line of sight a little bit. Kind of weird. Maybe I shouldn't have put the artillery here because the forests kind of make that difficult. They probably should have been set up more up here. So that's maybe a mistake as the Prussians. I need to get the artillery in a different position, but I think they're in at least a good enough position that we can operate. The one thing I should point out is that the streams are considered frozen over in the errata, which means that stream hex sides really have no effect. So for the most part, we're only dealing with towns and forests as defensive cover, and occasionally the slopes to adjust things. And otherwise, the bodies of water do create some blocking. So over here we have lake hex sides, so that's why the Austrian line can be kind of anchored on the lake a little bit. So yeah, so far it's interesting. I mean, I definitely am trying as the Austrians to avoid creating a disaster and fight the circumstances of the environment. The Prussians can still rely on really good morale and their ability to get artillery up in your face to some level of advantage. So that's going to be something that we could still see a bunch of Austrians just get thrown into disarray with some canister fire. It is feasible. It just makes the Austrian counterattack situation very difficult to achieve. What do you do? Maybe you wait for the Austrians to have some bad die rolls and exhaust themselves, and then you counterattack somewhere. Kind of hard to say. And these guys out here are still functionally some screening force that could cause some problems out here on the left flank. So they can operate. The only thing is they're out of command. I don't have out of command markers on them, but they're certainly out of command. So there's not a whole lot that they can do other than maybe be a distraction. These guys may come in and try to disrupt them and push them out of the way to open up this flank. And then if we're able to do that, we could do a lateral shift with the cavalry. That's maybe the reason why I should have put the cavalry over here, but the terrain is just really choppy. And it was easier to get them moving south down here, and then I can shift them west from where they're at if I really wanted to. Anyway, going into turn 2, we'll see what happens. Okay, here we are at what will be the beginning of our third turn, or what is on the turn track, turn 9, the 1500-hour turn. This is pretty tricky. I kind of feel like the Austrians actually came out ahead on this one. They've managed to remove some Prussian units and pushed some cavalry back. They sort of had them caught up and not really in a good position to withdraw before combat. So you can see there's some disorders here. There's a routing cavalry unit of the Prussians, and they're only barely engaging. Like they're trying to engage only where they think they're gonna get some benefit, and so far that's working out for them. They still have 2 wings that are in column as they prepare to kind of create a swap out. So we have these pretty good infantry going to come in and probably replace all the units that were with not Nadasti. I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. To relieve him, maybe pull them out, put the bigger, stronger guys in with better morale, much better morale, and then these cavalry coming over to kind of create a new flank on the Prussian position. So the Prussians are going to have to decide what they want to do here. They really need to make a strike somewhere that's going to cause havoc. There's still sort of this convex angle around Leuthen that if we could get some guys retreating back into there, it could cause a lot of problems. The routing units had recovered to disordered here, so I'm actually a little afraid for the Prussians. They really need to make something happen, but I think this is the turn to do it. In hindsight, I don't think I put the artillery in the best position to be useful, because they either can't get a good line of sight on something, or they're being used basically in defensive fire, but even then with some limited utility. So there's a little bit of challenge there with what's going on. So I'm hoping, or the Prussians are hoping, that this next turn when they go, they're going to be able to shift things heavily in their favor. But so far, I think I've done well as the Austrians to kind of get into the right positions, only engage where needed. We haven't had a major, engagement of contact, but I think this turn that's going to change. We have some heavy cavalry of the Prussians that haven't yet gone to task on anybody. So we're going to maybe see something happen here in this next turn. It could be the most important turn of the scenario here coming up. That's going to decide, what's what. Right now, the morale situation, both sides have gotten some combat successes, which have staved off some morale loss, but again, it could collapse very quickly if we can get the Austrians in a state of flight, I guess, is the important thing. Okay, here we are before we start the 1600-hour turn. This was a pretty bloody turn, but I'm thinking the Austrians actually are coming away with out of it a little bit better, just due to the whole operational situation. So both sides have lost a fair number of steps, and their morale is starting to drop. The Austrians are kind of being pushed back in the center, so the shades of Cannae a little bit, Cannae, depending on how you want to pronounce that, where the Austrian center is flagging pretty significantly. And in fact, you can see units being pushed back with artillery, and we're probably going to see this artillery captured. The only thing helping them is probably this blue formation that has some decent morale levels, kind of moving in a position to try to hold the center, which they may be able to do. But out here on the Prussian left flank, what we're seeing is basically the maneuver of the backup cavalry led by Luchis, smashing into the Prussians, and so far kind of winning the day. And we have the potential now with some routing Prussians to envelop the Prussian position further south. So I think it's really going to come down to what's really going to matter here is who demoralizes first, because I think before long both markers are going to be in the demoralization zone, and if one breaks before the other, that could be the real main difference here. It could come the end could come very fast depending on how this shakes out. So the Prussians need to figure out, what can they do to set up a new safe position for themselves, hopefully try to rally their troops, and then dive back into the breach and hopefully break the Austrian center. If they can do that, they may be in better shape here. But what's nice is as the Austrian units retreat into Leuthen, they are far enough away from Prussian units, and being in the town helps the rally roll. So even though units were routing, they're kind of reorganizing in the rear there. So that's going to be, I think, the key thing. So while, yes, the last turn was key, it shook out just enough that I think this next turn will be even more important, and we're going to see where the battle ends up here. All right, here we are at the beginning of what is going to be the last turn of the game. I guess on the turn track, turn 11. For us, it's really turn 5. Both sides are in the potential to be demoralized, but both passed the check at the end of last turn. So both sides have lost a lot of units. Morale is an issue. Routing units on the board have caused them to drop. And basically, the Prussians have one more shot to try to break the Austrians as much as possible before the Austrians get to go, and then, what else can they do? The key thing that the Austrians probably need to try to do here is they have to get fortunate with their disorder rallying rolls, and then try to hit everything that they can that's disordered, try to break up any other units, eliminate stacks, And hopefully, when the Austrians can go on their own, um, they basically don't have any units with high enough morale to dare try attacking the Prussians. And if they do, they're more likely to rout themselves. So that's kind of the key thing, is to try to do as much damage as possible, so that the Prussian morale can improve by the end of the turn. The Austrian morale goes down, and then the victory point count will be in the Prussians' favor. But it's going to be a near run thing. I think I've made two mistakes as the Prussians. One is not position the Prussian artillery to be in the best position that they probably could have been at any given point. Just not, I mean, they were fine for defensive purposes, but just not as, I just didn't use them as effectively as I feel like I could have. The other thing is I've let much too often the Prussian cavalry just become disordered without any real backup, and that's left them kind of brittle, which has allowed this light blue wing of the Austrians again to come west and really cause some havoc. So I'd say I probably played the Austrians better in this scenario than the Prussians. I made some mistakes as the Prussians, where I think as the Austrians I played quite well, kind of managing the disadvantages of the battle and kind of plugging in units where they were really needed at the right time. And I've so far managed to avoid any super chaotic um, routing situations. So it's this could actually end up being an Austrian victory, and I definitely don't think we're going to see the heights of the historical victory for the Prussians. And again, I think I've just played too well as the Austrians for that. I think I was able to operate in a way that really, again, negated much of the pain. And some of this, the die rolls matter too. Some very decent die rolls for the Austrians have come up. Of course, both sides have suffered some pretty nasty die rolls across the board. This whole thing where I thought we were going to be able to, outflank the Austrians, well, they're pushing back quite well around that lake. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. We're going to have to see what can be done here. I think the one chance could be that we counterattack over here. Oh, well, he's routed, so he's not going to be able to do anything. We might have to pull somebody else around, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We could still make something happen. So this is kind of the do or die. I keep thinking, one turn is going to be decisive, but both sides are just being ground down each turn almost equally, which really should benefit the Austrians, and I think it will, unless the Prussians can get a really good set of die rolls and attacks this turn where we can hit these disordered guys with our the collapse of the Austrian center is probably the most significant thing here, where that's probably going to be some of the deciding factors on what happens. Is that while the Prussian left is collapsing, so the sort of a twisting, turning event, while this kind of holds relatively steady. So I'm going to play it through. We're going to get to the end of the battle, and we'll figure out what the situation is. Okay, guys, here we are at the end of the game. Both sides demoralized in the final morale check at the end of the last turn. I did not play through all of the actions or routing or disordering or any of that, because despite the minutia of moving all the counters around, none of it would have impacted the end victory point determination at that point. And so I didn't do that, but many of these units might have become routed and started running over this way. Generally, all the units would have had some retreat path that we wouldn't have ended up with more units eliminated off the map. At least I don't think so. Would have taken a lot to get, there's enough hexes here that we wouldn't see guys leaving the map and accruing more victory points. So with that, we then look at the victory points, which I've taken all the units off the morale tracks and I counted them up over here. Reminder that a counter eliminated is worth 1 point. A counter captured, which you rotate 180 degrees to reflect that, is worth 2 points. And then every step, not counter, but step of artillery captured is worth 2 points. And so the final tally ended up being 37 victory points for the Austrians, 35 victory points for the Prussians. which when we look at our sort of victory conditions here, there's no Prussian victory, right? It would have required the Austrian army being demoralized and the Prussian army not being demoralized, which did not occur here. And then we look at the marginal victory. Um, so it's any two Leuthen hexes. That's true. Technically, the Austrians do have that. And they have more victory points than the Prussians, which is true. But I think this is considered an Austrian substantive victory because it doesn't say that the Austrians have to be not demoralized. So I'm trying to parse this. The victory point differential is 6 or less, or it's 0 or lower. And I wonder if that means, like, if it were, I guess if we calculate this, it would be the Austrian victory point minus the Prussians, which 37 or 35 minus 37 is -2, which would be a Austrian decisive victory, which it's tough to say here, guys. I think generally speaking, the Austrians, I don't know. Do I feel like the Austrians really won? I would definitely say I played better as them. They were certainly in a position where they were getting pushed back. I think if the Prussians had avoided being demoralized, which would have required them not losing so many units, because basically both sides got to the point where it was an automatic demoralization. Their points were below 0 each. Had they not been demoralized and the Austrians had demoralized and we were still playing, like there were more turns, I could definitely see the Prussians getting victory, but it would be pretty bloody. So, yeah, I think with this one, I don't know that I'm going to play the main scenario for this one because I think this was a pretty close fight and it felt pretty good. I would definitely say that, I mean, you might look at this and say, well, this is balanced towards the Prussians. I think that's true. I just didn't play them very good. And then it just became a situation of outmaneuvering the Prussians in terms of space. So, like, really utilizing this space over here with our cavalry, and just maybe some bad die rolls. But um, I think the other important thing was pulling back some of these guys where I could. If they weren't engaged, I was trying to kind of pull them back and put different units in there that had better morale, that generally could survive longer. And I think that was a key thing. So while the Austrian center was pretty much being broken, that delay had basically cost the Prussians their flanks. If you look over here, these guys are routing, these guys are disordered. They were going to be able to swing through here. Technically, these guys should be marked as disordered right here, but not super critical. So the important thing was, like, on the flanks, the Prussians were losing the flanks up over there. They were beginning to lose the flanks over here. So you can see there's a little bit of a standoff here, but these guys were going to keep moving down. This guy was going to chase him down. This guy wasn't, has one step. He can't really hold on much longer, and he has opposite him a 4-step. So, like, you could see the situation evolve where the rest of Frederick's army gets surrounded as these guys start to rally in the town and then come back around. The other important thing is, when they retreat towards Leuthen, that gives them some bonuses for rallying. So we definitely had some units that were getting into the town, but then if they stopped there and they rallied in the town, that helped them get kind of, at least not be routed, and they could at least be disordered and eventually work their way back up. So I think this was, again, I think a good play on my part is the Austrians to not just simply feed the Austrian army into a wood chipper down here in the south, but to actively try to outflank and spread out more. And maybe you could try to figure out, what Are there any other special rules you would want if you were going to really shackle the Austrian player? But I think, like, historically, what had happened was the Austrian cavalry had come down. There was a fight, and eventually the Prussian cavalry won, and that sort of ended the chance for the Austrians to flip the table. And I think in this case, um, I think it just came out that the Austrians kind of won out on the cavalry fight. Um, and maybe that's just the die rolls, right? I mean, just the way things shook out. Um, had the Prussians utilized artillery a bit better, I could see that being a huge factor and maybe being able to resist on the flank. Like maybe I should have left some artillery up here on these hills and have been firing down, and maybe that might have made a difference. Um, with the way the artillery really works, even as the Austrians, you move with the artillery, and so as long as you don't enter a Zoc, that artillery can stay up top and basically provide some defensive fire if the enemy comes to you. For the Prussians, they can freely move forward with their artillery, engage in some combat, and if the enemy hasn't retreated, then you can blast them with canister, or whatever. Uh, but if you advance after combat, the artillery doesn't advance after combat, so you kind of have to. It's kind of a weird thing. Like, how much do you want to use your artillery? And if you advance after combat, you want the position, you're giving up the ability to fire, because then you need to move the artillery up, and you need to be able to get them into a good position. So I think figuring out how to best leverage the Prussian artillery tactics, had a I don't know, I feel like if I had a better grasp of the best way to utilize that, we might have blown through the center much faster, and then that would have been a very bad situation generally for the Austrians. But it just didn't work out, and things kind of got bungled around. I think the forests were a big problem. Forests are fun to hide in, but if you're moving through it and you're trying to attack out of it, that's where your artillery are going to have problems. There's going to be minuses trying to come out of the woods into flat terrain. So you kind of want to be very careful with the terrain. It really is, you stick somebody in there to hold it, but you don't want that to be your focus of attack. Um, and that ended up slowing things down for the Prussians. So definitely chalk this up to poor play on one side and better astute play on the other. If you were playing this opposed, I could definitely see how this is a highlight of a battle in the game product in this system, because you're not totally screwed as the Austrians. You have an opportunity to try to shift the position. You just have to be very careful. And as the Prussians, likewise, you might start off in this battle scenario in a pretty good position down here, um, but you're still outnumbered. You still have to kind of arrange your forces just right to make something happen here. So I'm pretty pleased with this scenario. I'm almost tempted to replay it, but I do want to get to some other scenarios and try them out as well. But this is pretty good. I think this is much more interesting and was more fun than Rossbach, just because it felt like you had a little bit more decision making uh, that was immediate. So there was sort of I okay, it's the Battle of Leuthen is much better than the Battle of Rossbach, because the Battle of Rossbach is really a training scenario, it feels like. The main scenario of Rossbach is certainly more interesting than the battle, because you have a lot more options. Here, even just playing the battle and not playing the main scenario, I actually felt like the Austrians, could make some decisions. Now, their efficiency die rolls were crap, uh, or the ranges are crappy, but I got fortunate a number of times where I had units in column. They were able to move pretty far. So by the time they were rolling crap and were degraded, they were pretty close to where I wanted them to be, and they could operate a little bit better. So um, I think it also helps that I've been reading more of the examples of play from the designer in Prussia's Glory 2, which just has a lot more examples of like how to really operate, and that did help the Austrians quite a bit. And then again, even with cavalry, I mean, I think it's very easy in the system to get greedy with your cavalry, where you just want to be sending them into the fray, but you really have to think about, like, okay, well, that one stack is going to be disordered, and if I don't cause the entire enemy stack
to retreat, then that cavalry is gonna be stuck. As opposed to if you force the enemy to retreat and you have two stacks of, a two stack of 4-step cavalry, the first cavalry, disorders from the combat, but then you can cover that disordered cavalry with a formed undisordered cavalry as you change the stacking order in the advance after combat. But if you don't advance after combat because the enemy had support and basically had another unit underneath, then that's a problem. So I guess that in my head I'm like, oh, that makes total sense, because you couldn't just send a huge, like if there was a huge body of infantry, you could not expect the cavalry to just by sheer weight of force push a huge amount of infantry back. They can certainly push some back, but you're eventually just going to run out of momentum with that large a body of men if you have multiple infantry stacked, in near proximity. And that I got into trouble a couple of times for both sides in regards to that. So if you can't tell, I'm pretty pleased with like all the little decisions you need to make and how you want to approach it, and how the system's kind of playing itself out. So call this one a good one, guys. I enjoyed it. Here of a reversal of fortune for Frederick, an Austrian decisive victory potentially, if I'm interpreting this right. And yeah, you could imagine, you play a little bit longer, the Prussians might get surrounded, and maybe Frederick's doomed. I could certainly see that. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. The Battle of Leuthen. A different result than historical, which is cool to see. We'll do another battle here in the not too distant future. Thanks for watching. Take care. Keep gaming.